All right, so I think we're good to get started. I got the thumbs up back there. All right, so thanks everyone for coming to our talk today. So we're going to be providing a project update on a NRCS SIG project called Managing Pasture for Healthy Farms and Soils across Vermont. And my name is Maddie Hassett. I am the research coordinator at Philo Ridge Farm, and I'm also the research coordinator on this grant.
And my name is Noor El Nabulsi. I'm just an independent agricultural research consultant.
All right, so just a little bit of project background to kind of get us started thinking about this project. So back in kind of 2018, 2019, folks at the Vermont Land Trust were thinking, thinking about conserving farmland, keeping that land open from development, but also thinking about keeping those farms active and how can we keep those farms kind of active and contributing to their communities. And one thought process that folks had at the Land Trust and at Philo Ridge Farm is that could grazing be kind of a viable low barrier way to do this? Could kind of supporting grazing operations help keep farms open and active? And then we brought in some folks from the University of Vermont, and we were kind of thinking from a research perspective, we don't have a lot of kind of robust research on the realities of grazing operations in Vermont. We certainly have, projects here and there. We've got a lot of research on grass-fed dairies and things like that. But when you think about the body of research about grazing operations, out west or in places like New Zealand with, big farms, big grazing operations, we just don't have that in the Northeast and Vermont. So this project kind of came about as a way to kind of take a stab at that and do a little bigger project looking at a few more farms and just thinking about the reality of grazing. How does it impact land? What are kind of the finances involved with it? And how does it impact farmer quality of life? Is it a viable way to kind of keep farms open in Vermont?
And when you say open, you mean farm?
Yeah, keep them like farmland and keep them kind of active, able to kind of take part in their communities. Because I think, we have lots of beautiful open land in Vermont, but a lot of it's not being used right now, kind of as farms kind of transition out of use. So how can we?
Care if it's a productive or profitable, sustainable farm, you just want to keep it.
I think it depends on what you're coming from. We'd love to see it be used, for a farm so we can kind of contribute to the local food system. I think some people just like it to be open. And from the folks at the Vermont Land Trust and Philo were like, we like this land open, we like it beautiful, but how can we use it? How can we kind of integrate it more into the communities and the food system? So we're kind of thinking about how can grazing be a way to do that. And before I get too far, I know we've got a lot of farmers in the room here, but I just wanted to run through what I'm talking about when I talk about rotational grazing. So rotational grazing is when one portion of the pasture is grazed while the other rests. So a lot of, some operations will have continuous grazing where the animals go out in a big field, they stay in that field, you're feeding them out there. Rotational grazing is keeping animals in one part of that field, and it just allows forage to recover, helps the forage kind of deepen their root systems and support the long-term health of that pasture. Ideally, rotational grazing can help you extend the grazing season, and it can help you increase your stocking density. So getting more animals on the land and potentially more profit at the end of the day. And to take it a step further, MERG, so managed intensive rotational grazing is a term we're going to use a lot today, is when animals are moved in shorter time intervals out in that pasture. There's kind of different definitions of MERG, but some folks say anything if you're moving the animals every 2 weeks, that's intensive grazing. Some folks say if you're moving them every couple of days, that's intensive grazing. But a lot of the farms in our study move the animals every other day, every day, even multiple times a day. So MERG, managed intensive rotational grazing, is just moving the animals quite a bit out on the pasture and making sure that large chunks of that pasture get to rest when the animals are not there. Every farm is different. It's based on land productivity, what your herd requirements are. And I just like to show this diagram here. You can see on the left, we've got a continuously grazed pasture. And just think about if you're in a continuously grazing operations, you just need a perimeter fence you need access to water, and keep an eye on your animals. Once you get more intensive, think about the labor involved in getting more infrastructure out there. You're moving the animals every day, every other day. So you're getting more out of your pasture, but you're also having to put some more labor and potentially some more infrastructure in. So that is something that we're looking at with this project. So that's a little overview of kind of the background, what types of grazing we're looking at, and then back to what this project was looking at. So we wanted to look at the ecological, social, and financial outcomes of incorporating MERG, so intensive grazing, and other pasture-based soil health practices in Vermont. We managed to enroll a mix of beef, dairy, and sheep farms across Vermont, across 4 grazing seasons. So we collected data from 2022 to 2025. And we had 15 experimental farms and then negative and positive control farms as well. And just a little bit about the farm demographics. 5 dairies, 6 beef farms, 2 sheep farms for lamb and wool, and then 2 beef and sheep farms. The farmers ranged from having 0 to 20 years of experience with MERG. We had 10 different soil textures. 5 out of 10 of the Vermont biophysical regions were represented. And then the total operation sizes of our farms range from 13 to 550 acres. And I know that our farms are varying quite widely in this study, right? We kind of run the gauntlet of a very small farm to a very big beef farm. That does affect how we kind of analyze and share our data. I just want to put that out there. We did have a very wide variety of farms, but that is the reality of on-farm research, right? You know, we find the farms that kind of fit what we're looking for and that are open to working with us. So I just wanted to put that out there. It is a wide variety of grazing operations that we'll talk about today. And then, so the practices that we supported in this project that we were looking at were managed intensive rotational grazing. Every farm had to graze on some level. Animals had to be moved every 72 hours for us to consider it intensive grazing. Most farms moved them every other day or every day. We also supported supplemental seeding. So farms could get, you know, different forage mixes, different grass mixes, anything they wanted to put out in their fields. They can do it in any way they wanted to. They could frost seed it, they could broadcast, they could, you know, no-till it in, they could do anything like that. And then we also supported nutrient amendments. So that includes fertility inputs like compost, wood ash, manure. And we also ended up including bale grazing in that because bale grazing is a good way to get nutrients and seeds back into the soil. And, you know, this is an NRCS project. So the federal grant funds were used to provide incentive payments to the farmers by acre for the practices that they did. So by acre, and these payments by acre, they just really helped, you know, farmers implement these practices while maintaining farm viability. Yeah.
Yes, we did not restrict the nutrient amendments. It was largely wood ash and on-farm manure and compost, but there were some that used an NPK fertilizer mix as well.
We really, you know, we didn't want to restrict farmers in what they wanted to try. And, you know, from a research side, that certainly adds a lot of factors that we have to take into account. But we wanted them to have a chance to try something new, you know, try a different soil health practice out there. And then we'll kind of look at how that affects different things out in the field. So good question. All right. And I just also wanted to share that 52% of the federal grant funds for this project went to direct farmer payments. They also paid for soil testing and forage quality testing, as well as support from technical service providers. So, you know, if we had a farmer who didn't have a lot of experience with MERG or just wanted some help thinking about fertility, you know, amendments or different seed mixes, they met with a technical service provider that we helped them kind of connect with to figure out what they could do out of their fields. So, and then just kind of setting the stage for the rest of this presentation. You know, this is 4 years of data that we're kind of sifting through here. So we're sharing preliminary results today. And we are also really excited to get feedback and questions and just kind of what people are thinking about as we kind of sort through all of this data. So, all right, hand it over.
So kind of from that first bucket, looking at the ecological sampling, we had 71 experimental fields, again, over the course of 4 seasons of pretty extreme weather. If anyone is from Vermont, I don't know how, if New Hampshire got kind of the same thing, but 2022, we had mix of very wet and drought periods. 2023 and 2024 obviously were very wet in some areas, and some of our enrolled fields experienced that flooding. And obviously this past 2025 season, just, across the board historic droughts. So we're tracking that, and we're acknowledging that is, going to affect every facet. But with some of the results that we're finding, it's pretty cool to see the resilience that these fields and these, farmers were having. We think we're connecting the dots through MERG as well as the other practices and their management. So 3 times per grazing season, we sampled for species composition, forage quality, compaction using a penetrometer alongside a soil moisture meter to try and narrow that down. It's a tricky one. And the sampling periods, we did an early cool season sampling, a kind of mid-summer slump sampling, and a secondary late cool season sampling. For the soil testing, we did a kind of baseline 2022 Cornell CASH test and a final season 2025 CASH test. We also offered optional annual UVM soil tests just to kind of see near-term management decisions, fertility recommendations. We also did bulk density cores, microbiome sampling, and water infiltration, just using a standard 3-ring infiltrometer. So just a little background for those that aren't familiar with the Cornell CASH test. This is just a random generated example. The Cornell CASH test is a pretty well-reputed national soil health test. It takes into account biological, physical, chemical indicators of soil health. We chose the Cornell CASH test because it was an NRCS recommendation, but also it really kind of provides a suite of indicators for us to nerd out on. We kind of acknowledge that from the farmer's end, it does not provide near-term recommendations, fertility strategies. That's why we offered those UVM tests that a lot of the farmers were much more familiar with. You get your recommendations right there. But again, for our research side, Cornell is very comprehensive in these indicators. The other thing we want to acknowledge with the CASH test is that it is kind of calibrated to different soil textures and soil types. So the results do factor that in. However, it is also calibrated to more national and Midwest soils, which oftentimes Vermont soils will, or just across the board, really show up in the high quality categories. And it's really exciting that the Schreck Lab, the new UVM soil health lab, is kind of working with Cornell to adapt a more Vermont and Northeast specific soil test that should be really exciting because it'll be more calibrated based on regional soils. So for our preliminary results that we're looking at, we're calling this soil health, again, under extreme weather. So this first thing we looked at was overall soil health. So that is kind of the combination of all of these indicators kind of spits out, this nice little overall score.
And that was, I'm sorry, go back. That was a data set that was taken.
This is just yeah, this is made up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this was not in 2015.
No. This is just all made ups. Yeah. So for the overall soil health change, we saw that 53% of MERG fields showed improvement and 32% of MERG fields showed decline. We kind of just came up with these categories based on those Cornell brackets. Within the Cornell test, it's every 20 points is a different category, ranging from very low to very high. So within that, we just kind of came up with these brackets of large improvement all the way down to large decline, with some staying stable. And again, we're seeing that 53% of MERG fields showed improvement, while 32% of fields between that baseline and ending sampling showed decline. However, something to note is that 61% of MERG fields entirely, of those 71 original fields, 61% already started in that baseline in the very high category and remained there. 70% of those in that moderate decline category also started very high and remained very high. And 81% of the moderate improvement fields started very high and remained that way. So we just want to kind of be transparent that, you know, when we present this, it doesn't really paint that full picture. We have really amazing farmers that across the board, whether it was the control or the MERG enrolled fields, steward their land, really care about their practices, and just, you know, had good soil quality to start. However, don't want to gloss over that 53%, you know, showing improvement under those extreme weather conditions is nothing to just glance over. And we're excited to kind of, especially within that 8% in the large improvement, as well as the 4% in the large decline, to kind of hone in and go back to kind of all the factors that Maddie's going to touch on in a little bit. We did extensive record and practice tracking over the course of the study to really try and do kind of a forensic investigation and see, like, what is the story behind those fields? How did they get from point A to point B? So we're excited to look more into that. So just into some of those more specific categories, and again, that overall change, the overall category is nice because a lot of these factors taken by themselves don't really explain as much as when they're in combination with each other. Soil respiration and organic matter playing with each other, compaction and aggregate stability, that kind of thing. But when we look at these different categories, we see that 61% of MERG fields improved aggregate stability, which again helps with that crumbing and that gluing of the soil and the root exudates. So that's going to help with soil structure, erosion resistance. 54% increased available water capacity, which of course helps with drought buffering. We had many of our farmers state, and we saw from the data, that even in the droutiest drought parts of this past season, in the summer slump, they were not feeding out supplemental feed. They were getting 100% of their daily intake still from pasture in the heat of the summer.
What stocking rate per animal?
It very much depends. And for the biological, 85% of fields increased in soil respiration. And that really jumps out to me because, again, these were fields that had not previously had animals on them or practicing MERG. So we just see that really you're getting animals on there, you're getting that manure, you're getting that hoof impact, and the life is coming back. That soil respiration is those microbes and those living fungi and biological critters breathing and eating and cycling those nutrients. So we're just really thrilled to see that. And again, with that soil respiration, we saw an average increase of 16.8 points in the CASH category, which is almost a jump of 2 kind of qualitative categories. Yeah.
Is that 85% from the first year of the study to the last year of the study, or is that year to year?
That is just the 2022 compared to 2025. Yeah, baseline to end. Yeah, that's a great question. So those were kind of the time series comparisons. When we look at, excuse me, the MERG versus non-MERG fields that we also sampled, the MERG fields had a 10-point average higher in overall soil health score, water holding capacity 6 points higher, organic matter well over 20 points higher than non-MERG fields, that soil respiration, the biological activity, 16 points higher. And aggregate stability, we're transparent about our data. The data is not going to work out in every way you want. And with these things, we're just as excited and interested to kind of dig deeper and see, okay, what about the non-merged fields potentially is allowing that aggregate stability, that structure to really be holding. However, 91 and a 94 on a scale of 100, both pretty fantastic. So we also are interested at looking at kind of the most labor intensive work that we did, which was really cool, was to do this extensive botanical species composition surveying. And we're interested to see, is biodiversity of pasture species changing? Is the palatable or more digestible species, how is that reacting to having animals on the land in this intensive rotational way? So this is just from last year where we started to play around with the code. We're just now getting into our final data. So this will be updated again, but just to get a sense, just from last year. So, a little bit confusing of a graph, but I'll kind of try to explain. Each of the colors here is the different sampling months. And we ran it through our coding to do a species richness test. Species richness is just simply the number of species that are out there. And we got a p-value of 0.002, which showed us that over the course of just 2022 to 2024, that number of species was significantly increasing over time. Similarly, for Shannon diversity, which I have a little write-up because I still constantly need the reminder, Shannon diversity captures both how many species are present and how evenly they share the pasture. We used it because grazing doesn't just change species counts, it changes dominance patterns. Shannon lets us track overall community balance over time in a single meaningful number. So it's not just saying species count went from let's say one species to 10 species, but within that 10 species, it was one of those species dominating the whole percentage that makes it up. The Shannon captures the count of the overall number of species, but also how evenly it's being distributed. So it leads to a nice kind of overall biodiversity metric. And again, with a p-value of 0.01, we saw that overall pasture species biodiversity significantly increasing in just 2 years. And we're excited to kind of run those numbers again. Here. Of course. So we're also interested to look at pasture species palatability. So
I'm sorry, I'm
yeah.
a little curious. Did you get somewhat granular about shaded areas versus slopey areas? Okay, so within that last data set, there is more granular data.
Yes, I mean,
Really
if the way so in each sampling period, we tried to kind of roughly follow the same route around the field, but our only rule is if the animals are grazing that area, we're going to sample it. If there's a restricted area that they're not going to, whatever, we're not.
So it's basically the same grid.
Yes, yes. Same number of samples, same grid. So again, when we talk about palatable species of pasture composition, those are what we're calling the species that the grazing animals want to eat, that they're going to get that dry matter intake and those gains from, or that milk production from. Palatability is very subjective. It's seasonally subjective, cool season versus that summer slump, quackgrass early season versus quackgrass in the heat of the summer, tall fescue early season versus tall fescue with the endophytes in July, right? So we're thinking about that, but we want to think more about it. We got the green light from Heather Darby to look into palatability, so we're gonna think about it. It's also subjective from farm to farm, right? We have farmers that have trained their animals to really like burdock, and some that won't touch it, and some that like quackgrass in the hay, and others that don't. So we understand, and we're acknowledging that it is subjective, and however we can kind of try and parse that out and dig a little bit deeper into it, we think that it would be, it's a really meaningful thing. But just again, this is from last year, just starting to play around with the codes to prepare us to how we're going to start looking at that. All of these colors are the 71 fields in the study, and they range all over in the scheme of the mean percent palatable coverage. So we just tracked again from our sampling from 2022 to 2024, and for this, we did not see a significant change in palatable species. Again, it's pretty good across the board. That's right in the low 70s of percentage of pasture that we were calling palatable. Again, we had Maddie doing lit review, and we know from talking to our farmers. But again, I see the opportunity and I see the resilience in this because, again, with those extreme weather patterns and those extreme seasons that we were having, those noxious species, those opportunistic weeds and other non-palatable species that might take the opportunity of a stressed out pasture were not just coming in and bullying and dominating. We saw those palatable species hanging on. So we're excited to look more into this. Another really important aspect of the project for us was we wanted to get data back to the farmers throughout the project. We know, and from talking with farmers, that they enroll in a lot of these programs and give all this data and put on all this work, and then it kind of just goes into the research void, and they don't really hear the updates or what that data is coming back to them. So we really wanted to emphasize in digestible and meaningful ways getting that information back to the farmers. So we annually came up with ecological reports, going over their soil health metrics with them, as well as species change results. And another really cool thing was we came up with these narrative case studies. They were a requirement of NRCS, but really we wanted to kind of make it this document to bring the farmers' voices to the forefront and to allow them to, to be heard and to hear what went well with the project, what was challenging, what they wanted to see more of. And just, man, we could write a book of just amazing, beautiful quotes from these farmers. It's so inspiring to hear them talk about their work and their care for their families and the land. And aside from the NRCS report, they're really cool documents that can go into their farm store or to the local farmers market, and that be a public-facing document that any community member can pick up and see all the work that's going into the food that they're producing. Also, for any future conservation programs or funding opportunities, it's a nice, concise document that they can give to lenders to, again, show what they're engaging in to steward their land. It also has these kind of cool T-charts that cost benefit analyses that Maddie will get into in a little bit. And again, just farmers are the researchers also, right? As many data points as we come up with, their input and observations are just as valuable.
And were they paid for that?
They were, yeah. So there was an annual, I think, $2,000 data collection payment that just like across the board, if you got all your records in, you sat down with us for the interviews, all that, you got your payment. Yeah. So this again is just an example of this field. And just very simply, we would kind of come up with top 5 species dominance shifts, as well as grass legume forb shifts in comparison. Again, walking that fine line of making something that's going to be short, easily digestible, meaningful, while still, having enough that it means something. Again, when we look at top 5 species, we acknowledge that a lot of these fields had 20, 25, 30 different species. So that's certainly not capturing, all of the biodiverse species that are in there. However, again, it does show those shifts. And some really meaningful feedback that we had from farmers was saying, oh, well, I frost seeded red clover 2-3 years in a row. But they get so busy that they are doing all their other work. They can't walk around like us and identify every species. But, you know, for this example, we see white clover jumping up, for example, and they got to look at these reports and say like, oh, wow, I frost seeded that, but I didn't know if it was coming up, but there it is in the top 5 species now. So just little things like that to keep, you know, to keep them involved.
Would that have been like the native white or like a vagina? If they frost seeded,
yeah.
Do you know what the species was?
Yeah, we have all those records for this specific field example. I'm not sure what, specifically.
They're so variable. The native is
sure.
really low growing.
Yeah. And just for kind of additional results, again, we're going to look more into that species composition and palatability and the seasonality aspects of that. We took forage quality grab samples throughout the grazing season, and we have an amazing PhD student right here who's going to be kind of having a chapter comparing satellite biomass estimates to in-field rising plate meter and pasture stick estimates, and there's already some really cool results correlating those 3 methods that could be really impactful for farmers. Also, we are looking at avoided feed costs, which again is the dollar value derived from pasture intake. And that's real meaningful numbers that often gets overlooked because you just take it for granted that the animals are grazing, whatever, but we're kind of working with, you know, modest assumptions. But for example, if it's, let's say, 100% grass-fed dairy, we know that that minimum intake from pasture during the grazing season is 60% from pasture. So we work with those assumptions, what the different animal groups, what their daily gains or intake needs are, and we can basically, using hay and stored feed cost comparisons, come up with a dollar value of avoided feed cost. And it's they're large numbers, and they really can offset some of those other expenses. And to see, again, a lot of farmers, they know that and they take that, but to see that this year in grazing in a drought, you saved $32,000 in not having to buy in that extra feed from your amount of grazing days, it's very impactful. Turn it back over.
All right, thank you.
Is there a way to like back up so we can see?
Oh.
She's trying, I'm trying.
Oh yeah, maybe. Oh, it's taped to the floor.
There's a lot of work there.
Maybe you can move.
Oh, you know what?
Angle.
Oh, maybe.
Option B.
With that.
Okay.
Oh, here, I guess. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Oh yeah, maybe if we drag this slowly this way. How about that? Sorry, thanks for letting us know.
Is that better?
Is that
okay.
A little bit better? Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. All right, so lots of great information so far. And so remember back at the beginning, we mentioned we look at the ecological, effects of grazing. Now I'm going to talk about the social and the economic data that we collected. So our kind of social research side of this project, we just wanted to understand farmer motivations, concerns, and aspirations. Why are they grazing? And this really harkens back to the land trust thinking, is that how can we get farmers onto these properties and keep them working? What is driving farmers to farm in this way? And we also, this part of the project also looked at comparing farmer observations to ecological data. Is there a connect or a disconnect there? And how we went about doing this was with annual surveys. So farmers filled out a usually 40 to 45 question survey on Qualtrics every winter, just asking, different questions about what they're seeing out in their fields and things like that. We also did formal interviews when we check in about records, and just kind of that back and forth and just relationship building, really valuable conversations coming out of that. And a lot of this work also fed into the case studies that you had discussed earlier. And we also had a couple of farmer gatherings. So just really wanting to make sure that there's a lot of kind of interaction and feedback between the research team and farmers as part of this project. So I just wanted to run through some quotes that came out of those surveys and those conversations about a couple different things. Here are some quotes about why farmers continue to graze, why they want to farm like this. And I love the top one. I definitely relate to. It's kind of the nerdy side of it, is love seeing the ecological impacts of the grazing and the animals. And, seeing those numbers on paper. Farmers see it in reality, and we can kind of help them kind of get that down on paper. And another kind of cool quote was just being part of the kind of reproductive cycle of farming. And if they were to stop farming in this way, it would feel extractive. We talked to a lot of farmers, if it would make more sense to do, a different like confined operation versus grazing or stuff like that, they wouldn't want to farm in that way because they really enjoy, this type of farming, being out in the land and stuff like that. This quote was, it's not the best money, but it produces the best quality of life and the best food. So just understanding that, hopefully farmers are going to keep farming if they can farm like this. And how can we support them to do that? How can different organizations and agencies kind of help with that? And then this quote, it's just, this was a great, from a dairy farmer, I believe, it does help with the financials, with the cows doing the work for you. They're getting out there. You don't have to mow. They're spreading their own manure. If you can do it right, it is a really great, viable way to farm. We have like pages and pages of quotes that we just like read through and smile sometimes. So, and then this was a survey question, comparing from based on what farmers sought in 2022. And now we're at the end of this project. What are the benefits of grazing now that you've kind of been through this program, and maybe you have been grazing for years, but is there anything else that you can think of kind of the benefits of grazing? A lot of the farms, they enrolled fields in this study that were marginal areas of their property, so they hadn't had a chance to graze it before. It was tough to get like equipment in there, and grazing is a great way to just kind of use land that might not be a good piece of land for growing corn or other things like that. You can get animals on there. If you can really improve your pasture quality, improve your soil quality, that feeds into improved meat quality, improved milk quality and production, and getting into lower production costs with the saved feed. A lot of farmers mentioned healthier livestock, lower vet bills. You're not having to, get the hoof trimmer out. Cows are much healthier when they're outside in the fresh air. Same for sheep, and just different things. So I just wanted to kind of mention, this is what the farmers are saying, and then we're hoping to kind of correlate that with the data that we're collecting. And then the last kind of survey results or quotes that I just wanted to touch on was thinking about farms and communities and thinking just how important it is for farms to be involved in their communities and to have that support. Because one of the farmers said, I think our biggest success is to be able to support the local community and provide food, nutritious food to my neighbors and community there. And I think that's just, the more that we can, use our project to help support that, the better. And I thought this last quote, was really relevant today. Just a great quote. I'm not really an activist, and this is my way to do something to feel like I've given back somehow by just providing for the community around me. So just great, quotes that we're hoping to share here by the end of the project. And then just a couple slides here about comparing farmer observations to our ecological data. So this was a question about forage productivity. So we posed a question to farmers, compared to 2022, now at 2025, do you think that you have increased forage production on your enrolled fields? And that could be based on, farmer observations, that could be based on forage quality reports, anything, farmers can think of. And exciting, so 14 out of the 15 farmers answered this question. 5 out of those said, yes, I had a 25% increase in forage production at the end of the 4 years. 4 of them said I had a 25 to 50% increase in forage production, which is pretty significant. And then 50 to 75% of them said, 2 of the farmers said that they had a 50 to 75% increase in forage production. And that's pretty cool. And then so we're hoping to take those observations and relate those to our ecological data. And the reason why I can't show you like numbers from our data when I look at this graph is because it's so different farm to farm. So for each farm, we're going to be looking at their changes in the forage surveys. We're going to be looking at changes in their grazing records, which we track. So were they able to extend their grazing season? You know, maybe they got 3 or 4 rounds of rotations in a paddock instead of 1 or 2 in the first year of the study. And if they were haying the fields, so they get more off of that. So for each farm, we're going to be looking at, did they see an increase? And then can we find maybe where that increase is being showed in our data? And that's on the way. I just can't kind of go through it today. And then this was just kind of a follow-up question is, what do farmers attribute to those changes in forage production? 10 out of 14 said the practices they implemented through SIG, and that's going to change by the farm. You know, maybe they got a better seed mix in there, or maybe they improved the soil and things are improving there. And like the reality of on-farm research, right, is that 12 of them said they think the changes in forage production was due to the climate or the weather. So maybe it wasn't SIG practices, you know, maybe it was just a better year in the final year of the study. So I just want to point out, you know, that's the realities of projects like this, and we're just going to dig it into our data and see kind of what it is for each farm is maybe causing those changes. But that's just kind of all the different factors that go into our results here. All right. So that's just a little snapshot of the social side of the project. And now finally the economic research side of the project. So we were interested in seeing what does it cost, you know, annually to graze and improve pastures on enrolled farms, and how does that vary across farms? Because it certainly varied across farms.
Did you break this out for different, like small ruminants versus large ruminants?
Yeah, so
that would be huge. I mean,
it's huge.
Completely different commodities.
Yeah. So I'll say a little bit more about how we broke it up. So each farm is going to have really their own analysis. Like it's very difficult to compare to cross farms just with different labor needs and stuff like that. But how we collected it is that we got monthly records from the farmers, and they filled out any labor costs associated with the practices. So labor costs associated with moving animals, with putting up fences, with, you know, getting on the 4-wheeler and doing frost seeding out there, anything like that. We looked at infrastructure costs. So did you have to buy fencing? Did you have to put in a water line? You know, something like that to get animals out there. And then we looked at the cost of seed and nutrient amendments. They will be. Okay. They will be. We have a wonderful grad student like fighting for her life, you know, getting them all organized in there. And I'll kind of talk about how we'll show them. And, you know, it varied widely across farms. One particular data set that the NRCS was really interested in was labor. You know, how do farmers value their time? And we did break it down into, if you would pay yourself an hourly rate on your farm, what would that be? And that ranged anywhere from $20 an hour to $50 an hour, depending on the task, you know, and by the farm. We were looking for custom labor hours. So if you had to hire someone to do custom labor, you know, to get seed or some amendments out there, what did that cost?
I'm more interested in soil health changes for small versus large ruminants. And I'm assuming that's in the data set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, this really, we're just trying to get the whole picture. Like, what does it do to the soil and the forage? Why are farmers farming this way? And then trying to get at what it costs to do that. And the last thing I'll say on this slide is that, you know, farms enrolled a subset of their pastures. So we're not looking at like whole farm, like economics. All right.
So enterprise economics.
Yeah.
Of the farms that were kind of like collecting and organizing and analyzing that economic data and providing it to you, what were some of the leading practices or tools that you saw that they used this system for?
So I think that, yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is like kind of a next steps, because yeah, I mean, really it varied. I mean, wood ash is kind of like a hot topic right now, and a lot of farmers were kind of seeing good results from that. But I think next step on our end is to kind of, maybe we'll see, potentially for all fields, but definitely highlighting a subset of standout fields, maybe in either direction, pinpointing some fields that, soil health improved, pasture species composition jumped, maybe some of those, the finances and labor things got dialed in, and kind of pinpointing those in both directions, maybe some that really declined in those categories, and coming up with a more complete story and really digging into, okay, what were those practices? What were their haying grazing records looking like? And trying to, to see what's the secret sauce of.
Just to clarify my question,
Oh.
I think I'm thinking more of like the farmers that were tracking their labor costs, their infrastructure costs, or seed nutrition. Like, obviously, there's been months and years where I've done that, just like on like napkins, basically, and then there's other times that I've like gotten to better tool to Excel and Cornell and stuff. Was there any commonalities in terms of folks that are going to use the best economic data because they were using this?
The tool that we used was a big Excel file, and we broke it up by practice. So if you were practicing MERG, you put in the hours, when did you move the animals? How long did it take? What was the cost to do that? And then supplemental seeding, what did you have to pay for that seed? How did you do it? How long did it take? What was the labor? And then for the nutritional amendments, what was it? How much did that cost? I think the farmers that had been practicing MERG the longest, definitely their labor was like dialed in. They're very fast at setting up fences and moving animals. And what they could do in a shorter amount of time, that stood out to me. I think another thing I'm thinking of is fields that had like permanent fencing around them. You could save a lot of time if you already had that infrastructure there. That's kind of another barrier that folks talked about. It varied so much what farmers did. And maybe I'll get at this with this next slide. So when the NRCS has us talk about economic data, they have folks create these things called T-charts. They're kind of cost benefit charts. And this is an example from one of our dairies where we're going to talk about the costs and the benefits of supplemental seeding. And this is just an example. We're still kind of chewing through and how this is going to be the most helpful way to show data. But for example, this farmer in particular, kind of the concerns he had initially when he started this project was that his pastures were taken over by, not so great species like bedstraw and knapweed, and he was hoping to kind of up forage diversity and forage quality in those pastures. And he had a lot of different terrain. He could maybe get a four-wheeler in there, but he certainly wasn't going to get a tractor or anything in there to really do anything big. So for this practice, for supplemental seeding, we tracked the cost that he spent on seed, the acreage he spread that seed on, and then how they did it. And something that might be really interesting to include in here is the labor costs. We're still trying to figure out, the least complicated way to get that in here. But this is just kind of a snapshot of seeing this type of farm spent this much on seed on this amount of acreage over the course of the study. And then you can see the benefits. You saw an increase in forage production, increase in the animal production from that. This is a draft of the T-charts because we're just, we have all these Excel sheets of economic and labor data. And what is the best way for us to kind of provide a snapshot of that? And these T-charts will be included in those farmer case studies. So each farm has that narrative that you mentioned earlier. And then they're going to have these T-charts kind of talking about how the different supplemental practices impacted their farm over the course of the study. So this is a rough draft, and things we've kind of thought about including in here is, what type of seed did they use, somehow incorporating labor. But these are just really handy tools to kind of show it costs this much, and hopefully there was a benefit to that on that end. So this is one way that we're hoping to share the economic data. Yeah.
Do you think that's going to improve how NRCS reimburses farmers?
Yeah, that's what we're really hoping to show, that I think even a lot of time our, per acreage payments was not enough to cover the
Never
cost.
is.
It never is.
Well, there's also a
Yeah.
5-year lag between
Mhm.
Yes.
their cost collection and
Yeah.
cost.
But we're hoping this, feeds into this. If this is a good way to keep farmers on the land, it costs this much to produce these types of benefits. Can the NRCS, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but can that help kind of bump up support for farmers to be farming in this way?
When you have your not rough draft,
Mhm.
will you also have the fees for each of the different years? Because there's some of this has to be, the years are not ceteris paribus. And some years you have a different, response rate from a no-till versus a
Yep.
feed versus on wet, all kinds of, what's your nurse crop?
Yeah, it keeps us awake at night. There's so many factors, right, that go into this. Yeah. Yeah. And we're just kind of, oh yeah.
No. Yeah. So I think yeah, and
Yeah.
Again, we're always walking that tightrope of providing something that's gonna be tight and that people will actually read, but that will be informative. But then a little bit will be on your side. It's okay, we're the soil test results, and these will be publicly available. You'll find a farm of your size and your soil type, and then pull out this case. So there'll be a little bit of patchworking on the user's end too. But yeah. But we're gonna try and have it be pretty comprehensive. And the last thing I'll say with these T-charts is, for something like the supplemental seeding, again, not as straightforward to just assume or put dollar values. We can have farmer observed benefits, which again are just as much valuable data points as ours. But for something like that MERG, that's where we think it will be really interesting to have that avoided feed cost come in and compare some of those MERG labor, CapEx expenses compared to any potential, avoided feed cost, number of extended grazing days in comparison to previous years, things like that.
Yeah. Great questions. All right. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, as we work on these T-charts and get our results out, the end of this project is really this upcoming June. So we'll have a report coming out. We'll have these case studies with the T-charts coming out. So we're still really chewing on this data and, getting it out there by then. And we'll be sharing that. The Vermont Land Trust will be sharing it. Philo Ridge Farm will be sharing that out. But this is a publicly funded project. So we just want to make sure that all of that data is available and accessible to folks to see that. And there's also going to be some research articles and, graduate student projects coming out of this. And I just want to mention, I think, Alex, you have a poster about the satellite work.
No,
just the grazing. Okay, so if you want to learn more about the rising plate meter stuff, there's a poster up here. And all right.
And kind of just as a nice segue to what Maddie was saying is, and to kind of your question here, it's we want this, and to all of your great questions, we want this data and this information to be informative, to be usable, replicable for other farms. So that's where I think that this next step is really going to be kind of trying to piece together the story of the fields and those changes. And it's a big lift, but really conglomerating those hanging and grazing records, the supplemental practice tracking with the ecological and the qualitative benefits, and kind of seeing how are farmers making it work in this system. Are they making it work? Is it something that a young person, the next generation, can look towards and see viability in that? And we think that's crucially important. And kind of that leads me to this last piece, which is, what is the heart of this project? Beyond all the numbers and the data points and that thing, I think for both of us, we can say the most valuable part of this work is building the relationships with these amazing farmers and just seeing how much they care, and watching their kids grow up over 5 years and just feeling that trust build. So we want to do right by them, and we want to advocate for them. So I just prepared a little written statement to kind of sum up what the broader impact, what we hope to do with all this. So At its core, this project exists to make visible the full value of pasture-based farming systems, especially managed intensive rotational grazing across social, ecological, and economic dimensions. This work isn't about claiming MERG is perfect or universally best. It's about documenting with rigor and honesty what this kind of farming provides, what it costs, and why it deserves meaningful public support. Socially, this project confirms something that farmers have been saying all along. Pasture-based farming is not just a production strategy, it's a quality of life decision. Farmers choose this work because they want to be outside with their animals, connected to their land, and practicing a form of agriculture they feel proud to carry forward. This matters for farm succession, rural vitality, and the identity of Vermont agriculture. Capturing and honoring that dimension through case studies is not extra, it's central to the work. Ecologically, the data backs up what farmers observe on the ground. Managed grazing supports soil health, improves forage systems, and builds resilience. These changes translate into real ecosystem services: better infiltration, reduced erosion, more active nutrient cycling, and greater capacity to withstand climate stress. Payments tied to these outcomes are not handouts. They are compensation for public benefits delivered through stewardship. That's a point I really want to hammer in. They're not just handouts. They help us all. Economically, we also, face the hard truth that MERG, just like any other kind of farming, is expensive. It requires labor, skill, and infrastructure. It does not magically make farming cheap. What it does show is that well-managed pasture can meaningfully reduce reliance on purchased feed, and those avoided feed costs are real. But the bigger issue is that farming of all kinds operates in a system that undervalues food and the people who produce it. Taken together, the conclusion is clear. If this is how farmers want to farm, if it delivers public ecological benefits, and if it helps offset production costs, then public investment through projects like CIG and other payment for ecosystem service programs is not optional, it is necessary. This project provides farmers with evidence, policymakers with defensible data, and communities with a clearer understanding of what it actually takes to steward land and sustain working landscapes. The heart of this project is not any ideology tied around MERG, it's accountability to farmers, to the land, and to the future of agriculture in Vermont. Thank you. And we'll just provide a little shout out to the rest of our team. We need to go through everybody, but again, it was a partnership between Vermont Land Trust, Philo Ridge Farm, and University of Vermont, and just an amazing group of people we've been really, really grateful to partner with and who really have their hearts in this. And I think this is great. We still have, 15 minutes. We don't have to use all of it, but it could just be any comments, questions, feedback as this is still developing.
So the benefit to sheep particularly that are susceptible to parasites is huge too.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that has a big factor in your
It came up in the surveys when thinking about, save costs and animal health. I know it definitely, the more you can rotate sheep, the better for different parasites. So yeah, it definitely came up in the surveys. Yeah.
It came up. And, we'd always like to have more. We only 2 of those 15 only 2 were exclusively sheep. But it certainly came up.
Question about land access. So you talked a little bit about how the land process and I'm involved with a local land trust that does the same thing. Very small percentage of their properties are appropriate to veg, but none of them are being used for livestock, and as part of the ag committee, we're trying to figure out what the access issues are. So was that part of this? Is that, or did farmers already have access to this land, and then they sort of said I want to go over?
I think, initially what we wanted was farms that had not grazed before. We wanted to look at what are the barriers to starting to graze. And the reality is we couldn't find enough farms, on properties that we could work with. So we ended up going with farms that most of them had been grazing and they just enrolled land that they hadn't been grazing on or something like that. I think that was kind of the original goal, is looking at, if it's a farm that hasn't been in use, what does it take to get it to that point? That's still something we're trying to figure out.
And land access is such a huge piece, obviously, but like, again, we hope that maybe these tools will help an up and coming farmer provide some kind of defensible data, or project reference point to come up with a business plan to say how they're going to steward that land, what the potential avoided feed costs and income generation can be. But it's a hard reality across the board. Of course, we had some farms where it was entirely owned and already had that perimeter fencing. We had some enrolled fields where it was entirely leased. And that's a whole different bag of tricks, including, are you going to make all of these fertility investments on land that's not even your own? So that's a huge dimension. But like, I really do think Vermont Land Trust is doing great. Maggie Donan is the kind of farm acquisition leader. Our kind of big boss, Annalise Carrington, project manager, is amazing also. And I think they'd be happy to kind of talk through stuff as well.
Yeah, great to have a land trust or other land trusts. That makes sense for these fertility amendments. I feel like we did that a lot. We leased a lot of land. People are often like, well, we can't guarantee you that time we can get that deal. It's like a very quickly a catch coming through with a landowner.
Totally. Maggie?
Did you have any data that showed decreased feed costs of like pigs and chickens, where you're always going to be feeding some grain? Or is it mostly cattle?
It was, yeah, we did not, we had some farms that had pigs, but nothing on, so that's the big part, is that, like Maddie alluded to, is that something just to keep in mind was that these were not whole farm analyses. These were like the enrolled fields.
Like some people spread chicken manure.
Oh yeah,
on some of them. That was a amendment, but yeah. Did you have a question up front?
Yeah, I think this is such an opportunity with the social and the ecological and the monitoring put together, and farmers as researchers. And so I'm wondering if, based on all the work that the farmers did as part of this and answering the survey and explaining how they do things, and where they're coming up with their observational, are you also evaluating how any of your measurement, your collective measurement tools, again,
like it gets what they're observing. Yeah,
you're wrong. You said you increased by this much, but my tools say otherwise. But you can go the other direction.
Yeah, that's
probably.
Yeah, I think that very quickly, and then you can.
Are you gonna come up with a recommendation, like we would change this aspect of our monitoring or whatever based on?
Yeah, maybe Maddie can answer that. What came to mind for your first part of your question was, we're really, again, I keep hitting on that avoided feed cost thing, but we're really trying to flesh it out and work with amazing technical service providers to kind of look over our math, because not only can we get at that dollar value in avoided feed, but it can also be backtracked and say, okay, that was the dry matter production of that field. So if we're tracking that for each year, we can kind of see like, okay, farmer A said that this level of, forage yield or production was increasing. Does that come up in our, dry matter calculations as well? But
something I was thinking of. So we showed that farmer report, or we talk about, dominant species and how things have changed. We've certainly showed those to some farmers and they're like, are you sure? Are you sure that orchard grass is a dominant species? Are you sure there's that in there? And I think that's really interesting because, we're following a rigorous scientific way of collecting botanical data, but it's not perfect, right? So, maybe instead of doing quadrats, we'd want to try doing like a transect next time, or go back to exactly the same spots. Like we've certainly run into things where they're like, I don't know if that's true. And that's very valid.
Will that be part of your reporting?
Yeah, definitely part of the reporting. And we've also been, we have a farmer gathering coming up, and we're going to ask them, what tools did or did not work? Was it like really difficult to fill out the haying and grazing form. Are there things we could change with the labor data? Like, are there better ways that we could be asking for these things? We were kind of set in our ways with what we did in 2022. We had to keep the same as to what we did in 2025, but are there better ways from their perspective that we could be looking at things and collecting data? So that's part of it, is just thinking how we can improve something in another project, or if we wanted to dive deeper into the social side of it, what could we do differently?
If anyone wants to fund the next 5 years, I'll join
Yeah.
the team, because there's still a lot to look into, and that's kind of what we're battling with, and just the reality of like, that's just how these projects go sometimes. But how can we set up the data as cleanly and as thoroughly as possible that, then the next researchers can take it on.
Yeah.
Is there, in the beginning of your presentation, that example increases that you got to emerge? Is there anything
For the soil, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything you got so far that like looks to be a correlation or hypothesis? Like was that on like a specific were there outliers that were known for that?
I think Alex.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say by fields.
Yeah. The one I was thinking about compaction too. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we want to again look more, and now that we have those preliminary results, backtrack and see like what potentially could be accounting for that. I think as Alex was alluding to, there's like a certain set of fields that weren't actually enrolled, but we were sampling as well and kind of tracking, that we didn't include here. But there was like this insistence from this farm that like, these are the star fields, these are the poster child, so we're just gonna kind of keep hitting them and kind of not really take as much as the observation. We're going to take the historical goodness of them into account and kind of hit them. And those fields actually steeply dropped, So I think it's just that balance of hanging on to what's your star hay field, what's your, field that you're going to get 4 rotations out of, and maybe more having these tools to say like, okay, well, what is actually our observations currently, updating the grazing plan, looking at what the soil test results and stuff are telling us.
Did these farms develop a grazing plan?
They worked with the TSP if they needed like assistance with that. Some of them they know what they're doing. They're just gonna go in there. But they had that support. But they all had a grazing plan. They all had to practice MERG with those minimum or maximum 3 days moves. So yeah, they did have one.
And just kind of to go back to your previous question again, what we did see was that I think the level of like aggressively, for lack of a better term, like taking advantage of, okay, they're paying us for the seeding and the nutrient amendments, let's like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Those farms that really, honed in like the rotations, high stocking density, 24 hours, we're going to try different seeding every year, we're going to do all these nutrient amendments, those were the ones that, and again, we want to really hone in on what potentially those were, but those are the ones that jumped. And then we had a couple farms that just, for family reasons, capacity issues, kind of stuck more to that 2 to 3 day rotation, never really seeded, didn't do the nutrient amendment, just kind of stuck to the MERG thing, which was fine. Those were the ones where we came in 2022 and 2025, and it was same species composition, same kind of level of cover and stuff. So I think there is something to, again, maybe not, and that's why we want to talk to the farmers at the farmer gathering and saying like, okay, farmer A, you tried all of these different things, can you help us maybe, and your fields responded, like, what do you think from your farmer perspective was that? And that's what we're really excited to get out to the farm community.